6:02. I will call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. The first item is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is roll call.
Alder Allen.
Present.
Mayor Arata Frada. Here. Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst.
Here.
Alder Jetzer.
Here.
Alder Maldonado.
Here.
Alder Strassman.
Here.
Alder Udell.
Here.
And Alder Wheeler is absent with excuse. You have a quorum.
Excellent. Next item is the approval of minutes of the August 23rd meeting.
I'll move approval.
Motion's been made.
Second.
And seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is public appearances for any non-agenda items. It looks like everybody is here for something on the agenda. So we will move on to Tracy Foss, our utility person, and we'll talk about the water and well systems for the city. Assistant City Engineer, to be precise.
Okay. Good evening. This evening I'm going to talk about the water system. I have 5 different topics for this evening. First is just an overview of the current water system. And then I'm going to give an overview of the future system within the next 2 years. We have a lot of improvements, a lot of facilities that we're going to be constructing, improvements that are going to be made that will change a number of features within our system. Next, I'm going to talk about the SCADA. That's what controls our system and monitors it. I'm going to move into water quality testing, and then system maintenance will be the last topic that I'm going to discuss this evening. The next slide will be the water system map. And I'll use this for topics 1 and 2, the current and the future system. We have 4 water systems within our system, if you will. We have a Danville system, which is over to the west side of our city. And we have a Rimrock system over at the east side, very small systems, service maybe about 60 homes. We own the system, the mains in the system are ours. However, they are supplied with water from the Madison Water Utility. We have a bulk or a wholesale meter. In Rimrock, we have one, and a vault in Maloney Road that monitors the amount of water that we use. And then in Danville, Hugo Jamestown, when that shelter went in, we put a meter station within that park shelter. We also have a smaller south system. We call it the Greenfield area. We have 2 small wells in that system that service it. We have well 7. Got to find my mouse. We have well 7 that pumps about 350 gallons per minute. And then we have another small well number 8, that pumps about 250 gallons a minute. So total combined capacity in that system of 600 gallons per minute. Minimum fire flow requirements within your system are 500, so it's just so that we exceed that in that system. We also have 2 hydropneumatic tanks. That's what maintains the pressure. The combination between the 2 of them is 6,000 gallons that we have. The final system we have, that's our main system. We call it the North system. That's everything else you see on this map. So this whole entire area, all these zones, all comprise our North system. It's divided in 3 zones. That's based on elevation. Our higher elevation, the highest elevation is our west zone. The center is our east zone, middle elevation, and then our lower elevations in the city are in our northeast zone. They each function separately. The northeast zone is dependent on the east zone, but the west zone and east zone they're very independent. They have interconnections, but they run separate. The west zone has well number 5 that pumps 1,450 to 1,500 gallons per minute, and then it also has well number 10. I can find it. that pumps about 1,300 gallons a minute. And those are the 2 wells that make up that zone, the source supply, if you will. We also have 2 above ground or elevated tanks. We have Tower E, which I got to find right here. This is Tower E. That's a 750,000 gallon tank. We have Tower C, which is 500,000 gallons. In addition to the above ground or the elevated storage, we also have ground storage at the Camp Badger Reservoir, which is at well 5, and that's another 500,000 gallons of storage. So we have a total combined storage in this zone of 1.75 million gallons. At the Camp Badger Reservoir, just a brief overview of how this works. The well pumps the water into the reservoir, and then we have 3 booster pumps at this station that pump the water from the reservoir into the system. It's a great spot for a facility like this with all of the industry, with Sub-Zero. We even have Promega out there, CertCo, General Beverage. A lot of commercial out there, they need more fire flow, and that facility has the ability to turn not just 1 pump on, but 3 pumps on, provide an additional probably about 2,500 gallons per minute of fire flow in the event of an emergency. Here's the east, the west zone boundary here, and then the next zone over is the east zone. And that is all. This is the zone boundaries from when I started, and these boundaries will change. But this is what it's been, is what they had laid out when I started here for the east zone. We have 2 wells and 1 tower in this zone. Well 4 pumps 1,100 gallons a minute, and well number 11 pumps about 1,000 gallons a minute. This well is dialed back. We have a VFD at this well. It was put here to this location. It was intended to temporarily feed into the east zone until the northeast zone functioned on its own. With its location, there's very high pressures here, so we dial it back to make sure that we stay under 100 psi in this area. We also have Tower B. Tower B is our oldest tower. It went in when well 4 went in 1969, and that's 500,000 gallons of storage. Collectively, between the 2 zones, we have 2.25 million gallons. Just kind of a general rule of thumb, you want your average day of usage in storage. Last year, we used 2.162 million, so we're pretty close to that average day usage. The northeast zone, here's its boundary. This is 100% dependent on the east zone. It is supplied with water through a pressure-reducing station right on the border of Swan Creek here. It reduces the pressure from 100 psi to 80 psi. Future improvements, I'll start with the west zone and the changes that will happen to the west zone. The boundary of the west zone will not change. It will stay similar to what it is today. But what will change is we're drilling another higher capacity well in this zone, and that will be in the Stoner Prairie neighborhood. The design capacity is 1,500 gallons a minute. With that new well, well 5, and well 4, and the new well 12, we call it, will make up the source supply for that zone, and well 10 will be switched to the east zone when these changes occur. 10 right now, the way it functions with 10, because of how close it is to Tower C and the transmission mains we have between it, if well 10 is called to run, it just fills C, and Tower E just slowly loses storage capacity all day, and it doesn't fill back up. Until well 5 kicks on. When well 5 kicks on, then it evens out. But if we were relying totally on well 10, we would need to transfer water between the zones in order to make those towers fill evenly. But the new location, well 12, we've modeled that, and the towers will fill much more evenly than what they do today with 10 and 5 servicing the west zone. The east zone, as I said, well 10 will go into the east zone. Another benefit, other than the fact that it just fills C and the towers don't fill that evenly today, is that this is a lower pressure zone and we'll get more capacity out of that well pumping it into the east zone. The boundary of the east zone will change, not much, but, well, no, I think significantly, actually. Here's the boundary today. We are going to stop it here, and this will just be, what it is today is what it will be as far as build out. The northeast zone boundary will go all the way to the city limits, and this will all be northeast zone. So this will be down here, you'll have from a west zone to a northeast zone boundary. The south system will become part of our northeast zone. Well 11 will become a northeast zone well. It will pump 1,500 gallons a minute. We won't have to dial it back anymore because we won't have the system pressures that we have today. And then we're constructing a new tower, Tower D, at Highway 14 and Lacey Road here. This tower will be 600,000 gallons. The PRV station that's reducing pressure today, that's mechanically operated. With all of these changes, we'll need to modify that station so that with controls and so that it'll operate based on set controls that we establish. In addition to this, the south system, currently in 2021, we put mains in to connect the south system. Right now it's just isolated. That you can't, if we were to connect it, you wouldn't be able to operate 7 and 8, and then this area would just be a long dead end. But because they were doing the road at that time, we put the mains in. It's the most economical time to do it. But with these changes, once the tower comes online and well number 12 come online, and we make all these zone changes, we will open this up to the northeast zone. We will abandon well 8, and we will keep well 7 as a secondary well in that zone. The reason to keep well 7, lower nitrates in that well, higher capacity, 350 versus the 250. Ultimately, in our master plan, we have a well slated for, in this area, higher capacity well, more of a 1,500 gallon per minute well. When that goes in, we'll abandon well 7 as well. These little wells down here, all of our main system wells are drilled 1,000 feet deep. They're cased into the Mount Simon. Most of Dane County gets their water from the Mount Simon aquifer. It's got a shale layer above it. It's very well protected from contamination. The shale layer doesn't readily allow water to flow through it. But these little wells, they're drilled into the Mount Simon, but they're not cased into the Mount Simon. So they're more susceptible to contamination, surface contamination, because they're open to the upper aquifers. So ultimately, long term, they'd be great wells to abandon. A couple other things I forgot to mention that I just wanted to go back to. We do have an interzone booster station between the west zone and the east zone. It has a couple pumps. It can pump water from the east zone to the west zone if needed. And then it also has a controlled valve that will flow water from the west zone to the east zone when we need. So when we take wells offline, that's when we transfer water between zones and when we use that station. It's all set by controls through our SCADA system. And then the other thing that I think is important for everyone to note is that Madison, 10 plus years ago, put a 16-inch redundant line from one side of, from their area on the west side to the east side of near Fish Hatchery Road. They put a 16-inch water main down the Cannonville Trail to connect those two areas, and as part of that, we entered into an agreement with them for an interzone or an inter-city connection. So we have right near Seminole Highway, we have a valve that in the case of an emergency, if we couldn't keep up all our wells, something major happened, we would be able to open that valve, and then Madison could feed us water through that valve. My next slide is for SCADA. What does SCADA mean? What does it stand for? And it stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It's a software that we use to monitor our system. It's real-time information that comes into the SCADA, and it controls. It's how our system is controlled. It also notifies personnel if the system's not operating according to set parameters. And it generates all our required DNR, our monthly DNR reports. And we just have to download them off the SCADA system and then load them into the DNR website. How does it communicate? So all of our facilities, all our wells, booster stations, PRV stations, we have PLCs at each of them. And then we have antennas and radios that transmits all of the information from the well facility to a PLC at the maintenance facility, and then our SCADA interfaces with that PLC at the maintenance facility. Maybe the easiest way to show how the system operates is this is just a clip from our SCADA. This is the west zone in this clip. This is from yesterday. You can see Tower E in this diagram, Tower C. You can see well 5, our 3 boosters, our reservoir, and well 10, all in this zone. Currently nothing's running, so maybe not the best time to take a snapshot. If it's running, it turns green, and then you can see the flow coming from each one of those facilities. But how our system works, it's all based on the tower elevation. So we can set the tower elevation when we want the wells to kick on, which wells to kick on based on the elevation. So for example, well E, when it drops to 75%, it would tell a booster to kick on. That booster would kick on. If it continued to drop and it wasn't filling, it would tell another well to kick on. In this case, well 10. If a booster ran for 3 hours and it wasn't filling, it would then tell well 10 to kick on as well. Once the towers got full, it would then shut the wells off. It staggers when they shut off. We want to avoid hammer into our system. We don't want all our wells to shut off all at the same time. So it staggers the shut off of these wells when they're no longer when the wells get to a certain elevation. The reservoir, how the reservoir works, usually a booster will kick on, it'll start draining the reservoir. When the reservoir gets to 75, 80, it'll tell the well pump to kick on, and then it'll fill the reservoir. A lot of other information just on this screen. At this snapshot, you can see what the current demand is. You can see what the demand was yesterday. Interesting, it's 2.4. Remember earlier I said our average is 2.16 last year. I'm sure we'll far and exceed that with the dry conditions we had this year. You can see your, current demand at the tower, yesterday's demand, and then you have, if the wells were running, you would see their flow. You see pressures at the station. For example, at well 10, we have about 55 psi. Well 5, we're at about 67 psi. So a lot of information all in this one screen. But as you look at this SCADA, there's an east zone, there's booster stations, there's lift stations, and there's many other screens for each one, all have information. The controls are all within this software. We can set any of these parameters for how we want our system to operate. If we take a well offline, if we need to change, how it's set up, it can easily be done with just the SCADA system. My next slide is water quality testing requirements. Most of these are from the DNR, so we follow NR 809, Safe Drinking Water Code. It's the DNR requirements. Testing requirements for Fitchburg, fluoride testing, we do that daily, and we do that in-house. We have to do 1 sample per system. We don't have to sample the Danville and Rimrock areas. That's part of it's Madison water, so Madison takes care of that. Bacteriological and fluoride testing, these are through the state lab, not done by us. We do that monthly. Here's each one of the systems, north, south, Rimrock, Danville. As you can see, north system, much larger. We take 25 distribution samples every month, and then we have 5 well samples quarterly that we have to take. And then it gets down to the Rimrock and Danville systems where we only have 2 distribution systems every month. Inorganic testing, that's annually. VOCs, those are every 3 years if you've had no previous detections. We do have trichloroethylene that's detected at well 5. I think that's been since I started here. Our last test was 1.3 parts per billion is what that is. That's this year. The maximum contaminant level for that is 5. So we're definitely well under it, but it's still there and it's present. So we do test that twice a year. Synthetic organics is every 3 to 6 years. Radioactivities every 3 years. PFAS, that's a new one for us this year. This is the first time that it's been required to be tested. It's quarterly for the first year, and then they'll determine based on what those results are how often we need to test for PFAS after that. Chlorides, this is not a safe drinking water requirement here. This is MMSD. They have us test the chlorides annually in all of our wells. We do that because They're concerned about having to treat chlorides. Their chloride levels are high. And so they're looking at, what's in the source water and looking at ways to reduce chlorides so that we don't have to install more treatment plant facilities to treat salts. Disinfection byproducts, that's annually, and then lead and copper, that's every 3 years. Those are from homes. Most of these other ones above are at our well facilities, other than the disinfection byproducts and the BACT and fluoride sampling. But the lead and copper are in homes, and they have to be homes that were built prior to 1986. The next slide I have is for system maintenance. Most of what we do follows DNR standards. For the wells, the DR recommends removing and inspecting our pumps at a minimum every 10 years. Wells 4, 7, 8, and 11, we have an 8-year schedule. Wells 5 and 10, we have once every 5 years, depending on conditions or performance of those wells. If their capacity is staying the same, their specific capacity is staying the same, their energy usage isn't dropping, then we would wait another year. But under no circumstances would we go beyond the 8 years with those wells. These are on a tighter schedule. Well 5 was blasted during construction in the 1980s, and that has created a sand producer for us. The sand erodes our equipment, and so we have to, and then we lose capacity. And when we pull this well every time, we know we're going to replace the pump and a lot of column pipe just from the sand erosion on our equipment. It's just hard on it. Well 10, we have on a tighter schedule just because we have microbes in that well, and the microbes are corrosive to our equipment. And so we have that on a tighter schedule just because of, if it starts to fall off, to pull that and make sure that we take care of those components before they fail. Our generators are exercised monthly. Under full load, it's required quarterly, and we do it under full load quarterly. System flushing, we flush our system twice a year, and we do all dead ends each time that we flush it. We are working with Strand on a unidirectional flushing program that is scheduled to be implemented in the spring of 2024. With that program, you isolate sections of the mains that you want to flush so that you have water coming from one direction. It increases the velocities and then really scours the pipe, so you get better cleaning of your system with that type of program. Valves, we exercise those every 5 years. The DNR requires every 2 to 5. Hydrants, those are required. We do that every 2 years. Again, that's per DNR requirements. We exercise all hydrants in the city. A lot of them get exercised a lot more than that just because we're flushing our mains twice a year. Meter testing, this is at our well houses. We're required to do that every 2 years. We are required to test our meters, within the residence and then the commercial properties as well. The smaller meters, the 3/4 inch, 1 inch, are they're 20-year meters. They're required to be tested every 20 years, but they're throwaway meters, so we just replace them every 20 years. Or if you get larger, your 1.5 to 2 inch, it's every 4 years, and even larger than that, then it's more frequent than every 4 years. Storage facilities, every 5 years we're required to inspect those. It alternates between when we do a dive. Now they do cameras. Before they used to put wetsuits on and chlorine and jump in, but now they use cameras and they inspect it with cameras. And then that alternates every time with a full drain, where you have to drain all the water out of the tower and do an inspection. And then the SCADA, we have on a 5-year schedule to replace the software and the hardware. And a lot of that just has to do with security and making sure we have the most current security updates on that system. And then with that, just want to point out that we don't replace the PLCs, the radios, and the antennas that go along with that. We are doing that as part of our well project next year, but that's just because the PLCs are at their life and it's time and they're obsolete. We can't get parts for them. So we're just going to go ahead and replace all of them within the system. And with that, I have questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Can you talk about what the qualifications for our water workers? Do they have certifications? What type of training they have? And second, do we monitor the water level in our wells? Have we seen a decrease?
Sure. Yeah, we do. So you're talking, I'll start with the wells. So we have static and drawdown levels that we monitor every day. You know, it records the highest and lowest, so the lowest drawdown and your highest static level. Your static level is when your well is off, where's that water level at in your well hole? Your drawdown level is when your pump is on, how far does that water level drop? That's what it is. So we do monitor those. 4 and 5 are older wells. You definitely see that it's been falling with time, and that's common for the area. 10 and 11 haven't fallen too much. They've stayed more constant, but our older wells, you definitely see a drop in the drawdown and the static levels. Just to give everyone an idea how deep they are, I think it's well number 1 is 280, that's well 11. 4 is, I think, 265, but then well 10 is, I think, 380. So some of them are pretty deep, the wells are. In regards to the operators, they all need their water operators license through the DNR, and that's their groundwater and their drinking water, their system operating license. They're required to get. I think is it within 1 year? I think it's within 1 year of hire if they don't have it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tracy. I have a couple of questions, but what is PLCs? You know, you mentioned that a lot. What is PLC?
PFAS? Is that what you're
No.
asking about?
PLC.
Oh,
Programmable logic controllers.
they're like computers.
Oh, okay,
Yep,
okay,
same
okay.
thing.
Okay, so you're talking that as a way. What about the PFAS? You said that is required in 2023 for the city. So when are we already started with this program? Or
Yes, we've already done our first round of testing. But before this year, 2-3 years ago, we went and did a round of testing at all of our wells for PFAS so that we knew what would be coming. We wanted to know if it would have an impact on us and if we needed to start planning for additional treatment or removals.
Where we can find those results? Do you publish those or?
Yeah, they're on our website under water quality. For all of our wells, all of that information is there. Our first round of testing, we had no PFAS. We didn't have any PFAS in any of our main system wells. So our deeper wells are 4, 10, 11, and 5 that service the northeast zone. None of the compounds that we tested for had any results. 7 and 8, the littler wells, I think there were 4 compounds that had a trace of PFAS. We had a trace of 4 PFAS compounds in the smaller wells.
Okay. No, it's good to know because some of the questions that the residents sometimes ask, if there are too much going on TV about PFAS and say, how do you check that? You're checking that. And, so it's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah, and we will be, we have the first round back, and we will be updating that website with the first mandated round of testing that we did.
Okay. Thank you.
Randy?
Thank you, Tracy. Very informative information, but in my simple mind, can you explain going from well to reservoir to water tower? Does it always go from a well to a reservoir and then out, or does it go to a reservoir, water tower? I mean, what distinguishes the two, the difference?
You bet. Maybe I'll go back to...
Maybe the one on SCADA,
Yes.
that graphic? There you go.
So in our east zone, it goes from well to tower.
Well to tower.
East zone. And in our in our west zone, well 10 goes from well to tower. But at well 5 has the reservoir and the booster pumps, so it goes from well to reservoir to booster pumps to tower.
Okay, and the reason I want to understand is, there's got to be what determines if it's just a tower or reservoir, and especially as we expand our, I'll say our network as the city grows?
A couple different things could. One of this provides additional fire flow for the area, and with your sub-zeros and your promegas, we're looking for at least 3,500 gallons per minute of fire flow capacity for a 3-hour duration. This obviously helps with that in that area. We have 3 booster pumps, and while individually they can pump 1,300 gallons a minute, collectively it's probably more in the 2,500 range, just because they're fighting each other to pump that water into the system. So that would be the first for us in the way our system is set up. The other situation where we'd use it maybe on a zone boundary line, and that would allow us to pump into either zone, whichever zone needed it. We have a couple wells set up that way. Obviously, well 11 is set up that way where it's on the northeast and east zone boundaries, and then well 10 is also on the west and east zone boundaries. And they both, when we designed both those facilities, we made sure we had enough land to put a reservoir in at those locations, as well as we made sure we had enough land, and we made sure we laid out the well facilities at those stations so that we could put a reservoir in.
Okay, all right. And then how long does a well last?
I'm hoping forever, but
Well, in some of my reading it says 30 to 50 years. That's why, maybe that's more of a private.
no, I anticipate these will last a lot longer if they're drilled right and you don't have contamination. They can last. I mean, well 4 is 1969. I don't foresee us abandoning that anytime in the near future or distant future. Well 5 is in the 80s. Madison has wells 100 years old, I believe. So I just,
Okay.
We did have one crooked. We had issues with air entrainment that we did have to abandon. We've had 2 smaller wells that weren't drilled into the Mount Simon. One had, I think, back T contamination. The other one had nitrate contamination. So we have abandoned wells, but usually because they're either shallow or, in the case of well 9, it just wasn't drilled correctly.
So it's not so much the, I'll say the structure itself or the casings and so forth that you've described other things that for the reasons for the well to go bad. I mean, so, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So,
Casing is an important thing to bring up, though. It's one of the
Right.
things we are always inspecting to make sure that, the grout seal is intact. We grout between the casing and the upper formation so that so that the Mount Simon stays isolated and that we're pulling all our water from that Mount Simon. But if that grouting were to fail, then you could open up that Mount Simon to the upper aquifers and be pulling, that upper aquifer water in. So it's a very important part of the well.
okay, very good. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions, and they're kind of bigger picture questions.
Okay.
So you said on an average day we're drawing out about 2.25 million gallons, right? Mm-hmm. So, and Madison is much bigger. They're probably drawing out 10 times that much. So let's say that of all the people tapped into the Mount Simon aquifer, we've got maybe 35 million gallons a day coming out. How does that aquifer get replenished at that, what seems, 35 million gallons seems like a lot to me. So where does the water come from that replenishes that?
From the sky. So, ultimately it makes it there, right? So it works its way through all those formations and back down. We have shale. That's very confining where our wells are, which is wonderful, right? But there are breaks in that shale. Once you get to the lakes, that water gets into the Mount Simon. But we have a lot of sandstone. We're pretty far away from the lakes where it recharges. So, we have a lot of sandstone for that to travel through to filter it before it would ever get to us. And the groundwater too is, the direction of the groundwater is toward the lake. So it's coming from, the southwest going northeast is the direction of it. So we're not pulling from those lakes toward us. But there's breaks in the shale. It's all coming from the ground down, and then eventually it makes its way there.
But when we have a year like this year where the rainfall's been a lot less than normal, or even in the wintertime when it's all frozen and there's no water moving, what happens? What keeps that aquifer? Is there any danger that aquifer is going to run out of water at some point?
Well, and that's maybe to Dave's question about are we seeing drops in the, is the static levels and drawdown levels dropping, which we are seeing some of that. Very, very slight here in Fitchburg. Madison is seeing more of it, obviously, because they pull a lot more water than us. So it's definitely something that they're watching, and long term, we want to make sure that it doesn't continue to drop and drop too much. But at this point, we have plenty of water, and the seasonal fluctuations don't affect us at all because we're 500 feet below below the ground where we're pulling that water from. It'd be more your artesians and your really shallow wells that the fluctuation in the rain would affect.
So in residences or businesses for that matter, we're pulling water up out of the ground, washing dishes, flushing toilets, taking showers, doing all those things people do. And then the water goes down the drain through 9 Springs. Mm-hmm. And where does it go from there?
To the treatment plant?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then it goes to Badger Mill Creek and Badfish Creek is where so after they treat it, that's where the effluent is discharged to. A long time ago, there wasn't, I recall Verona had built an effluent return line to go back to, what is the creek in Verona? Badger Mill.
Oh, so that effluent line is still operating, because that runs along the northern, it goes through the 9 Springs Golf Course, and
yeah, it goes all the way through Fitchburg.
yeah.
In fact, they had a break in it last week.
Oh, great. All right, Gabriella.
We had a couple of issues with wells in the recent past where there was some bacteria growth, as I believe what was happening, and we had to do some cleaning and take them offline for a little while. Can you speak to that? And is that something that we anticipate happening in the future?
Yeah. So well number 4, 10, it's the microbes I was referring to earlier at well 10, and that's why we have it on that 5-year schedule. So in 2015, we chemically treated well number 10 to reduce the microbes in that well. You can't get rid of them once they're there, but you can definitely treat them and lessen the concentration of them. And then we had them looked at probably about 3-4 years ago, and then with some recommendations, we made a few changes to that well. And then this time, we had water quality investigators come in and test the microbe concentrations again. And when we pull this well, we're going to do a full treatment like we did in 2015 to that well. When we pulled well 4, we had water quality investigators take a look at that well too, and there's some microbes in well 4. Their description of that, it was more of a sulfide producing biofilm that it was creating that is very corrosive to steel. So it corrodes our components fast. We see corrosion more in that well. It's not a fast-growing biofilm, but because it's so corrosive, that's the issue that we have to deal with. When we treat well 10, when we put that contract out, we're putting out a contract to treat well 4 too. We won't pull well 4 to treat it. We'll do it from the surface down, and that was we discussed that when we pulled well 4. We also, at the time we pulled well 4, we heavily chlorinated that well, and we surged that chlorine in the well to reduce the microbes in that well and then we brushed the well too with that at the recommendation of water quality investigators before we put that well back into service.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
And then a second question. I know that
before you ask that, I wanted to follow up on that answer. So if we're seeing that at one well, why? And they're all coming out of the same aquifer. Why haven't those microbes gone to the other wells?
A fair question. A lot of unanswered questions when it comes to microbes. Why do we even have them? We didn't have them prior to, or we didn't know we had them, I should say, prior to 2015. One of the thoughts is, when they drilled the well, were they introduced when they drilled well 10? But now if we have it at well 4, well 4 has been around for 50 years. Why is it showing up there now and it hasn't been there all of these years? All great questions, but I don't have answers for it.
Okay, Gabrielle.
Thanks. I also, so just in general, like the wells, lift and pumps across all the different utility systems use a lot of energy,
They do.
generally speaking. Is there any, as we drill new wells and build new infrastructure, are there ways to make the energy requirements, lower the energy requirements? Aside from, obviously, we can try to get alternative energy sources for that energy, but can we actually reduce the energy usage for these systems?
So a number of things that we do now. The VFDs are very helpful. And the reason the VFDs are helpful is because when, if we have, like this summer, we had to pump them at full capacity. We needed the water. But in the wintertime, and a lot of years past where we've got a lot of rain in the summertime and people aren't watering their lawns, we dial them back and we keep them dialed back even through the summer. So instead of pumping, so we'll use well 10 for example, instead of pumping 1,300 gallons a minute, we pump 1,000 gallons a minute. And that uses less kWh or less energy per 1,000 gallons, dialing them back. So that's one thing we do. We have the ability to do at all of our wells. If you look at our energy usage per 1,000 gallons, well 11, the one we have dialed back to 1,000 gallons a minute all the time, that's our most efficient well to operate. Well 5, which you would expect because you have booster pumps and you have a well, is our least efficient well to operate. We also have top-off controls. They put that in the SCADA. Hard to manage that. That's more for money savings, not for energy savings. But that, the idea with top-off controls is during your off-peak hours, you want to get your towers full, pump as much water into the system as you can, so that you're pumping less during your on-peak. So that's more of a rate item. We have looked at solar panels, even with well 12. They did a study. I haven't seen it yet, but there's usually not because the use of energy is intermittent, it's not constant like this building, it's a little bit more constant. The police station is here, they operate 24 hours a day. You see more of a benefit from solar because our usage is nothing and then a lot. Solar panels a lot of times aren't near as effective, or you don't get the benefit out of the solar panels at our type of facilities. You have your basics, your lighting, those type of things, your heating systems. We have radiant at well 11, but compared to the amount of energy we use, just to pump the water out, it doesn't make a dent in it.
Yeah, so it's actually just like the basic function of the well is the thing that's taking the most energy. And
Yes.
and as we build new wells, it's just the reality of the energy it takes to pump water out of the ground. It just is always going to take a lot of energy, and that's just the reality of it.
You're pumping it from a couple 100 feet down in some cases, so and then you're pumping it against system pressure. So, for example, at well 10, when we looked at it, it's 55 pounds of pressure. You're lifting it, 300 or 280 feet out of the ground, but then you're pumping it against that pressure as well.
Great, thanks.
So, thank you. Another question that I have is, we have so many private wells. So what is the role of the city? Do we monitor those private wells? And if we do that, do we keep an inventory of how many there are? And
In our urban service area, we do. So if it's in an area where our municipal water is available to them, they're required to file a permit with the city if they still have a private well. And that permit requires them to take back T samples 2 weeks apart. They have to take 2 of them. And then if they were to have a septic system, they also have to take nitrate samples. That permit is a 5-year permit, so every 5 years they have to resample their well and apply for that permit. If they're outside the area where we have municipal service available, there's no requirements that they have to provide us any sampling information or whether the well's in compliance.
interesting.
Dave?
2 things. Can you explain the different size mains we have and the material that the mains are made out of? And second, at our pumps, we have electrical switchgear and things. Are those marked with arc flash labels for our employees' protection?
Yes to the second question. The first question, materials that we have in the system, our system is all iron. So we have cast iron in the older areas like Tower Hill neighborhood, Red Arrow up there. Probably through sometime in the 70s, we switched to ductile iron. And our system is primarily ductile iron. We do have some transit pipe in the system, but I would say well over the majority is ductile iron. And you can see where our cast iron is. That's where we have our brakes. Cast iron is not flexible. And so you get shear brakes in the wintertime with the frost. The ductile iron's more flexible, so you don't see the brakes in the ductile iron like you do the cast.
We don't have any polyethylene or anything like that.
No, I think there's one piece of plastic, sorry, over by Certco maybe, and that's only just because of changes that were made in the system that they had put in, and we ended up inheriting it, but we're not talking more than 50 feet of it.
Gotcha. All right, any other questions from the council? This has been a really good presentation, and I bet it provided a lot of information that most of the people up here didn't know.
Oh, well, I'm glad. Thank you.
So thank you for coming and giving us all that. Can you send that presentation to us?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
that'd be
definitely.
great.
All right, thank you.
You'll get that absent the map, correct? The presentation?
Yeah, that is so when we put this over air, it doesn't show the map because we don't distribute that for security purposes. So while you can see it, it won't be shown on Fact TV. So I can send you everything but the map.
Okay, that'll be great.
All right, thank you.
We'd have to kill you if we sent it to you.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And then we'll move on to our next agenda item. Do you want to start this off, or does Misty want to start this off?
Yeah, I can take that. So we'll welcome our recently contracted consultants from Mueller Communications. James Madlam and Maddie Krebs are here to talk to us about the services that they have been contracted to provide as it relates to our further conversations regarding a potential operating referendum in 2024. Specifically, they'll be going through a previously shared PowerPoint presentation with you and highlighting phases 1 and 2 of the 3-phase approach that they offer communities who are referendum planning and ultimately conducting a referendum. So with that, Misty, is there anything you want to add at all?
Not at all. You did great.
All right, I'll turn it over to our consultants at Mueller. Welcome.
Well, wonderful. We appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you here tonight. Just to confirm, can you hear me when I'm speaking?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Excellent. And I've got my colleague Maddie Krebs with us here as well, and she is driving the screen in the presentation. As shared, most of this is information that you have seen in your packets that's available to you. We're going to move through some of it pretty quickly. We want to give you a high-level overview, but we're here to answer any questions that you may have and happy to share any more detail about any of the other elements that you'd like to take a deeper dive in. So before we begin, I want to share just a little bit about our firm. Matt, if you can take it to the next slide. Mueller Communications is a full-service communications firm. We're based in Milwaukee. We take a 360-degree approach to our clients, bringing a diverse range of skills and services that brings unique solutions to the challenges that they're facing. Some days that is a challenging crisis communication situation. Some days it's launching a digital marketing plan to support business leads or talent recruitment. And in more recent years, it's looked like partnering with municipalities across the state to address funding challenges that address threatening services. And our client roster is diverse. We work with everything from small nonprofits to large Fortune 500 companies, and we work with a lot of municipalities all throughout the state of Wisconsin. You have a couple members of the team here tonight, but we have a team of 35 that are part of our full roster that provides deep bench strength and a broad range of skills that are available to you at all times. And we have 4 team members who have been assigned specifically to work on this effort with Fitchburg. So everybody always available, but 4 who are distinctly responsible for the day-to-day management of the work. So as we begin, I just want to provide a little bit of context for this, something that I think most of you are probably very well aware of, which is that as you begin to look at funding challenges in your community, the need for additional resources for staffing and other purposes, that you're not alone. This is something that communities across the state have been facing in recent years and have been grappling with. How do we make sure that we're meeting essential services for our communities? The Wisconsin Policy Forum has done an excellent job, as you may have seen, documenting some of these challenges. They are not unique to any one type of community. We see it in urban and rural communities, small and large. We see it in counties, we see it in cities. And all of them are facing a fundamental challenge, which is that costs for all types of services have continued to rise. And at the same time, the ability to raise revenue to meet those costs are very limited. There's a very limited number of levers that as a community you can pull. And the result of that is that many communities, over the last few years have pursued a tax levy limit referendum to enable them to raise additional revenue to meet essential services. And what you see in this chart is really the explosion in that option being pursued by communities starting in about 2017. So this is a challenge that built up over time, but many, many more communities have begun to look at this option and pursue it over the last few years. As they have done that, go ahead.
No, go ahead, James.
Sorry. As they have done that, we've had the opportunity to work with many of them across the state to really build robust efforts to help inform and engage the public in this process, help make sure that the community understands what those community needs are, understand the work that the municipality has done to identify and address those needs, and to help articulate what those options look like to help address those issues. And our focus there is on education, not on advocacy for any particular solution. And Mandy, I'll turn it over to you to share just a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So as James said, an important caveat to remember with all of this when putting the word out about a referendum is that a municipality can only educate about a referendum, but it cannot advocate. And although it can't advocate, the city does have a lot of opportunities to educate instead. And the measure of success with this is always an informed and engaged electorate. So what does this mean for public employees? So a municipality and its employees acting in their official capacity cannot advocate for a specific outcome in an election. We'll always encourage you to consult with your legal counsel regarding that fine line between education and advocacy. But the cardinal rule really is that you cannot use public resources to encourage people to vote yes or vote no. What's more appropriate is using public resources to educate the public about what it means to vote yes or vote no and the implication of both of those votes. Employees and elected officials can definitely still express their personal opinion and support in a referendum, but only if they're not serving in their official capacity at that time, and they specifically identify that their statement is a personal opinion. We've included some additional detail based on state guidance on the following slides that we'll provide after this meeting regarding what sort of activities are permitted and prohibited, but right now we can breeze through those pretty quick.
James, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Maddie, for that. We will include that information in the materials that we will send as a follow-up to this meeting tonight. But we want to turn now to the three-phased approach, of the first two phases of the approach that we are working with your community on, help provide kind of a high-level overview of that approach, the rationale behind it, and then answer any questions that you might have. So all of it is really built around a method, a path to help educate and inform the community and provide opportunities for the community to become engaged in that decision-making process. It is typical for this process to range from somewhere between 9 and 12 months total to ensure that there is that proper time and attention and ability for members of the public to become informed and to participate in the process. So the first phase is really all about articulating the specific needs that the community has. And I understand that Fitchburg is working very closely with Baker Tilly and others to identify what are the service needs within the community, how can those be best met from a staffing perspective, and ultimately, what are the costs that are associated with those needs in the community. And we will be working closely with all of that team to help begin to distill down those options into a document that we can share with the public, one that provides easily digestible, understandable information for folks who it's not their job to review all of these things in detail every day. And so as we do that, we work with the team, we'll create the options assessment. Maddie, if you want to take it to the next slide. that really distills this down. We try to include a lot of visual elements in this that demonstrate the need in a way that's very understandable. And then take this options assessment, this full documentation, and make sure that it's shared broadly with the community. So certainly presented in a meeting like this to formal elected bodies, but also made available online, shared with earned media, provided usually through social media and through other venues that allow for dialogue and discussion. And ultimately, if a new resource is required for an effort like this, we want to make sure that we're sharing that with the public and helping them understand why sometimes tough decisions need to be made around raising additional resources. None of us like to raise taxes. We all pay those taxes. And at the same time, we understand if they're being used for vital services that we value, why that is something that may make sense for us. And we want to make sure that we're articulating that in a clear way for the community for them to be able to evaluate that. So that's phase one, the options assessment. Phase two is really taking the core ideas that have been generated as part of that options assessment and taking it out to the community in the form of a community survey. And the way that we typically do this is through a mailed survey that goes to every residence in the municipality. And it really serves multiple purposes. One is, and most importantly, is education. It's a way for us to ensure that every household in the community gets a copy, a link to the options assessment that is there. But in the community survey, it embeds some key facts from that options assessment and then asks their perspectives and opinions about services that they value, potential trade-offs that they might consider as a community, and from a funding perspective, what are the different options that are available and their perspective on those options. And it provides a really important touch point for the community to learn and to become engaged. And then it provides feedback that you as elected officials can take into account as you decide what are the appropriate next steps to take based on the options assessment and based on the feedback that you get on the survey. And then ultimately, depending on the outcome of that process, it may be that that leads to a need to seek additional resources and funds to meet needs that the community has identified as top priorities. And if that is something that's pursued, that would then move into phase three, which really provides a high-level overview of what's being asked for in a referendum, what are the benefits to the community from a service perspective if those resources are raised, and what would the outcomes be if that referendum did not pass. And so I don't know if you want us to go into kind of those third phase options or not. That would again follow if the decision is moved relative to a referendum. And we can kind of provide an overview, if you'd like, relative to what that typically looks like in terms of outreach.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah. So if we decide to move to a phase three after phases 1 and 2 have been completed, then we move into different sort of communication outreach strategies that kind of make up this educational campaign. The materials are listed on this slide, but they include some deliverables like a key messaging document, kind of the single source of truth for everything about the referendum, a fact sheet that explains the current situation and the need for a referendum vote, and then an FAQ document to kind of dispel some misconceptions about the situation and then answer any questions that we would expect the community to ask. Different sort of approaches here. We will take key information from those initial deliverables and then leverage it in a variety of different ways. This can include direct mail pieces to all households in Fitchburg, the creation of a presentation deck for city officials to use to explain the referendum at different community meetings, and then also to the coordination of informational sessions for community members to learn more about the referendum and then also have the ability to ask questions. And then in terms of some online tactics, we can develop some content for a website landing page that residents can visit as kind of a one-stop shop for all information about the referendum. We can create some social media content that explains the referendum, promotes the informational sessions, and then also share some information about voting and then election day to get people actually to the polls. And then we also typically develop and distribute news releases to secure coverage in your local media about the referendum as well.
And ultimately, the goal of all of that work is to ensure that we have an informed electorate that when they go to make a decision around a referendum question, that they have all of the information that they need to make a decision, that they've had an opportunity to ask questions in a wide range of venues, and that whatever their source of news or information, they have been able to secure that, whether that's through traditional media, through direct communications with the municipality, or through social media. And so big picture, from a timing perspective, we have begun the process of phase one, which is developing the options assessment. We have started work of gathering the key information from the community that helps us to build that. We'll begin the process of working with some of the other consulting partners to finalize the gathering of that information with a goal of finalizing that options assessment, that document, by January of next year. That options assessment then would be built out into the community survey. And maybe if you want to take it to the next slide, that we would anticipate would be out in the field sometime in late winter, early spring of next year. And then the results of which would inform a decision as to the appropriate funding approach for priorities that the community has identified in there. And that could potentially lead to a referendum, in this case, modeled as one that might be in August of next year. If you were to do that, pursue something like that, that education process that Maddie talked about would take place over the summer, really. So between May and an election day in August. So we will stop there. That is a quick spin through the approach that we are working with the community on to address these issues, and happy to answer any questions that you may have about that work.
Julia?
So, hi, this is Julia. You mentioned that in phase two that you will partner with a third-party vendor to develop a survey. So who are those vendors? They are also locally from here, from Wisconsin?
They are. Yeah, we work with an organization called Community Perceptions. And this is what they do day in and day out, is work to develop surveys for municipalities, for school districts, for other public entities that help gather feedback and inform public decisions. And so we've worked with them for many years. That is our preferred vendor in this space. They are local and very experienced working with Wisconsin municipalities.
Gabriella?
Since you've worked with lots of Wisconsin municipalities on this, on referendums specifically, do you provide any sort of case studies or information about similar communities and their approach and what was effective or ineffective? Obviously, I know each community is unique, and that obviously plays into it, but is it only an assessment of what Fitchburg needs, or do we also consider what happened in other communities?
So we have worked with many communities. We do have case studies that help outline some of that work, as well as references in that work, and some of those may be in the presentation deck. If not, we're happy to include them in the follow-up materials that we will send after that meeting. From our perspective, every project that we engage on provides that much more information about what works and what works well. Also helps inform what's changing, relative to what works. And to give one example of that, certainly the rise of early voting opportunities has changed the timing with which we get information out to the community. We know that there is a very engaged segment of the population that is voting well before Election Day in greater numbers than they would have 3-4 years ago. And that impacts the timing and the approach that we take. So we are always working with communities to take those best practices, those learnings from that process, and incorporate that into the next project. Julia?
I have another question. So if we decided to move to phase 3, will you advise us which election will be the best for us to go to a referendum, or we have to determine that?
Ultimately, of course, it is the municipality's decision what the best and most appropriate election is for the community to pursue. What we can provide is guidance based on sort of the pros and cons of each election. And to take one example of that, In November, obviously, you have a presidential election next year, and that can be very good from the perspective that you have really high voter turnout. And ultimately, you want as many voices as possible to be heard on an issue like this. And so that's a positive about it. A challenge of it is because it's a presidential election, there is going to be a lot of communication around that ballot, a lot of mailers, a lot of advertising, a lot of other noise out there on other issues that it sometimes is harder than to break through. So that, from our perspective, is our responsibilities to help lay out for the community what the relative pros and cons are relative to a most effective communication with the public for any one of those elections, and then ultimately help inform a decision that the municipality will make.
Well, and to piggyback on that, another difficulty of the November election is that we kind of have to have our budget done before then. So I think waiting till November isn't going to work out. Julia?
Yes, I have another question is about how many wins did you have last year?
Yeah. So to be clear, from our perspective, because our focus is on information and education rather than on a voter outcome, a win for us was the electorate informed relative to the election, and were they making an informed decision in the ballot box? I will tell you that I think with only two exceptions, one of which was a multi-municipality where some passed and some didn't. If your question is, did the referendums ultimately pass or not? I think in the history of our working on this, I think there's only two communities where it did not pass over the last 7 years.
Two from what? How many? Two from 10 to 20? Do you have an idea? I need to know.
I hesitate to give you a number offhand. I think it's been 12 to 15 that we've worked on.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been talking with staff and working on different things for the last several months regarding this. And I apologize to the council that my brain was broken and I didn't think to ask a very relevant question, which I finally did. It finally occurred to me yesterday. So I contacted Misty and asked her, if we don't pass a referendum, what would happen to us in 2025? Which is kind of a relevant question to what we're doing here. So it doesn't look good. There's a lot of questions that we don't have answers to yet, even aside from a referendum. But based on some projections, with a 2% growth rate, we could be looking at a $900,000 deficit or so, which we obviously can't have a deficit, so that means we would have to find some ways to reduce $900,000 in actual spending. And that probably comes, in the form of laying off a bunch of employees. So, and that's just for 2025. 2026 is a little more uncertain, but, those numbers don't look any better at this juncture. So I think, in addition to the additional positions we're talking about funding through a referendum, including firefighters and communication staff and things like that, we also need to think about just bolstering our budget as it is, because the growth is going to be down for a couple of years. The interest rates are, the Fed announced sometime this week, it was this week, that they aren't raising interest rates right now, but they probably will raise them again before the end of the year. And that may continue into 2024, which is going to continue to keep new construction a bit depressed. So the rates of new construction that we've seen over the last 8 to 10 years or so is not going to be sustainable. And we've had this broader discussion about how unsustainable the funding formula that the state has dictated for us is. But I think we're at a point where we absolutely have to do something, or we're gonna be talking about doing things that the residents aren't going to like, and it's going to create major problems throughout the city and the services that we're trying to provide to our residents. Gabriella.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the public education that you do, because obviously you're educating about the specific potential, obviously, assuming we do a referendum, you're educating about the choices and the amount of money and those specifics, like the language or the wording, all those things with the public. But there's this overarching education that doesn't exist where people don't understand what levy limits are. They don't understand how Wisconsin is different than other municipalities and other states where the state has more control over how we levy taxes. They don't understand how, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of, and sometimes I feel like I don't understand it. And I'm sure a lot of people that work in city government probably feel like that way too. And then there's also, I think, somewhat misunderstanding about just what your tax dollars go to, because they pay their entire tax bill to Fitchburg, but they're paying taxes for all of the different overlying municipalities. So their tax bill is only a portion Fitchburg, but when taxes go up, even though Fitchburg taxes have been pretty stagnant for recent years, I think people have the perception that it's going up, but that's not actually Fitchburg taxes. So anyway, I'm just curious about how you put the referendum in context, or if you're even able to do that, because that's complicated, right? It's a really complicated message, and you can only say so many things.
No,
so I'm curious about what your approach is.
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head. It is a very complex issue. It's an issue that, even people who are civically active and civic minded, who are paying attention, don't always understand, right? Or have some misperceptions about, because it is confusing. And if you're not spending all day working on these issues, there's no reason for you to know all of those details. So a couple of things on that. One is that's why, from our perspective, this is a process that, isn't a 2-month process. This is a process that ideally plays out, over the course of 9 to 12 months, because there is a lot of foundational work that's required to help explain all those issues, all of what you just described at some level, but also then what are the types of needs that the community has, what's the homework that the community has and is doing to help document those, and also what work has the community done to figure out what are the different ways that we could address this and ultimately lead to a conclusion that, in this case, maybe it's that a levy limit referendum is the right approach. And so part of it is time and that process overall. Part of it is finding ways to, as much as possible, simplify it and provide visual ways to demonstrate what that impact is. And that often is one of the most powerful ways for people to both engage with an issue and remember an issue. And so we're happy to share, and I think we've included some links to what some of that work product looks like in communities, how that education process works. And part of it is about making it so that somebody who has 5 minutes, excuse me, sorry about that, has 5 minutes to assess an issue, gets a high level understanding of it. But those who want to peel back the onion, who want more details, have those detailed questions, that they've got the tools and resources to dig into it and understand it at a deeper level. Because you will have people who will do that. And then those people become evangelists in the community, the people who have done the homework and can share, hey, yeah, the community's done their work on this. This is what I've seen. This is what I've read. And so it really needs to work both at a very high level, very simple level, as well as at a deeper level for those that really want to drill down to it. That deeper level is what the options assessment is about. That higher level is really what the community survey is about, taking kind of those most essential core ideas and putting them in a way that gets in front of everybody in the community.
And then to follow up on that, so that sounds great. And I obviously simplify visuals, I think, can be super impactful. So I love to hear that that's part of the process. And I look forward to seeing the materials. I haven't had a chance to see those yet. But in terms of like immediate, obviously you're still working on the early process, but I do think there could be some, like I'd be interested in sharing this with my constituents if they have questions. Do you have like basic documents that like, here's what a referendum is, here's why it needs to happen, just so people can start educating themselves now? Is that like kind of like a basic kind of information packet that we can send out, or even just provide for the council for our edification?
So we don't have that specific to Fitchburg, right? So that is information that is absolutely embedded in past work that we have done. If there is a value to doing that at this early stage, we absolutely can work with the community to develop something like that helps explain that. I think from our perspective, part of this is sequential, and it is a process that helps lead people to the information when they need it in that moment. And so, at this point, we're developing that. We would be developing that options assessment, and then we would present that once that information is together and really focus on that part of it from a public education perspective. So, short answer is we don't have that specific to Fitchburg yet. That is something that would be encompassed in the materials that we would be developing if there's a need for that. We are certainly happy to work with the community to put that together at this stage too.
Yeah, that's well taken. I think take it one step at a time is probably the right approach and the right answer. But I guess maybe I just need to review those materials and take a look at what you have in more depth, just to answer my questions. So because people do watch these meetings and they have questions, it's not
Absolutely.
a huge number of us. I wish more people did, but for those individuals that are highly engaged, I want them to be able to have some answers. So thanks.
And to that point, it's a really great flag. And I'll just add one other piece there, which is one of the elements that you'll see in the tools that we provide is an inquiry guide that is designed specifically for elected officials, so that whether it's in formal settings like this or whether it is the inquiries that you might get as you're in line at the grocery store, you've got that high level information that you're able to share and that you're able to point people to for deeper levels of information. So that, from our perspective, is one of the most important things that we can do and provide in this process is the tools that enable you to effectively communicate with your constituents. Because those that are asking are those who are most engaged in the community, and they're force multipliers. So, as they become educated on these issues, they can then share it with others.
Shannon, did you have a question? It looked like you had your hand up. Okay. Anybody else? Well, you've provided a lot of information. Thank you. And I'm glad that we have selected you. Misty, while you're online, since you're going to be responsible for providing them with boatloads of information, are you comfortable with the process that's been laid out? And do you feel like we'll be able to get through this with a successful result?
So I'm really glad that council supported hiring the experts in this area, because I'll say doing it on our own as city staff, getting that education and outreach out there would have been monumental and more than we could handle. So having these guys on board that have done this before, know what's work, have those very visual things, I think we're going to make a good team and make sure that that information is all out there.
Great. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I guess we can leave. So thank you for attending the meeting tonight, and I look forward to future meetings with you and working through this process.
Well, wonderful. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. We stand ready to answer any other questions, throughout this process.
All right. Moving on, we have our next committee of the whole meeting on October 25th, and then we come to our last line item, which is adjournment.
I'll move adjournment.
Good.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you for coming.